Going to wait until Senator Feinstein shows up or until I hear from somebody that it's okay to go ahead. So just be patient, please. Let me turn the microphone on. Welcome, everybody. Today's hearing addresses a timely and important topic. Thousands of children throughout our country suffer from rare, extreme types of intractable epilepsy. Some of these children experience hundreds of seizures a week that prevent them from living anything close to a normal life. Parents fear that the next seizure may be their child's last. These children are often treated with multiple drugs to control that seizure. However, these drugs are very powerful, and some have strong side effects, which may also incapacitate the child's ability to function and develop normally. But in recent years, evidence has come to light suggesting that a substance called cannabidiol. Thank you. Thank you. You heard her, CBD, may help these children. CBD is a compound derived from a marijuana plant that can be administered in the form of oil. It's not smoked and it can't be used to get high. Even though all the leading medical organizations reject the idea of smoked marijuana as medicine, many have called for further research into the potential medical use of CBD. These aren't inconsistent positions. They simply reflect the fact that sometimes medicines can be developed from raw plants that shouldn't be smoked or otherwise ingested. For example, doctors prescribe morphine to manage pain, but they don't recommend that the patient smoke raw opium or heroin, which also comes from the same poppy plant. Right now, there's still much that we don't know about CBD and its effect on the human body, especially on children. In recent years, as word of its potential medical benefits has spread, more and more parents, out of understandable desperation, have turned to what is essentially a black market to get it. These parents are buying CBD products that haven't undergone the usual testing of safety and efficacy associated with new medicines, and in many cases haven't been evaluated for concentration or purity. And sometimes these products may be helping children, but sometimes they have no effect or sometimes may even cause harm. Out of concern for this situation, last October and again in May, my friend Senator Feinstein and I wrote to the Department of Justice and the Department of Health and Human Services about this issue. The purpose of our letters, twofold. First, we asked these agencies to consider revising regulations that may be inhibiting research into the potential medical applications of CBD. Some, but not all, of these regulations are related to CBD's status as a Schedule I substance. Encouraging responsible research on CBD is a goal that I think we all share, and I expect we'll talk more about these regulations today. But I'm happy that it appears our letter has already made a difference on this front. Earlier this week, Health and Human Services announced that it was eliminating the extra layer of review for non-government funded CBD research that it previously required its public health service to complete. Doing away with the public health service review, which wasn't required for any other Schedule I substance, is a step in the right direction. At the same time, it's also worth recognizing that research on CBD is proceeding, even under the current regulations. A highly concentrated CBD drug called, you want to help me with this too? Epidiolex X is currently...
Epidiolex. You
You
did it well.
Yeah, thank you. I got a compliment. This is currently undergoing FDA-approved clinical trials to treat two rare forms of pediatric epilepsy. I'm glad that one of the sites at which it's being tested is the University of Iowa. In addition, hundreds of children are currently being treated with this substance through expanded access investigation new drug programs. Just in the last 6 months or so, the number of researchers approved to conduct research with CBD on human subjects has increased from 16 to 41. So far, the data emerging from these efforts is promising. In fact, the company developing the drug plans to submit a new drug application to FDA next year. So even though more research is needed, there's reason to hope that at least one FDA-approved CBD medicine may be more widely available soon. Now, the second purpose of Senator Feinstein's and my May letter to DOJ and HHS was to ask these agencies to evaluate CBD using the appropriate scientific and medical factors to make a scheduling determination for it that is separate from the whole marijuana plant. If it turns out that CBD may be classified on a lower schedule than the entire marijuana plant, then research on it may proceed somewhat more easily. I'm also pleased to report that in response to our letter we received yesterday, Justice and Health and Human Services agreed to undertake this evaluation. This is a significant breakthrough, and I recommend those agencies for agreeing, commend them for agreeing to that step. I certainly don't know what the results of the evaluation may be, but the important thing is that it's made on the basis of a careful, rigorous review of science associated with CBD by experts. I look forward to discussing with the witnesses the ways in which we can work together to facilitate research on CBD that can result in safe, effective, FDA-approved medicines to help our children who suffer from these rare conditions. Senator Feinstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I basically agree with everything that you have said in your remarks. And let me just begin with my position. I have not been a supporter of recreational marijuana use for a lot of reasons, but that's not the purpose of this hearing, and I won't go into it. But I do believe that we have a responsibility to determine if cannabidiol and other marijuana-derived medicines could have a positive long-term medical benefit. And we should also explore the ways to allow compassionate access while simultaneously pursuing a medically sound path forward. I've heard remarkable stories from parents in California and across the country, like Tom Minahan, who you will hear later today, that cannabidiol has reduced seizures in children with intractable epilepsy and helped improve their quality of life. And I think we all applaud that and want to see that continued. I've heard from other constituents, like Catherine Jacobson, who after researching cannabidiol as a treatment, went to a medical marijuana dispensary to obtain it for her 6-year-old son, who has epilepsy. Instead, she was given plant material, not cannabidiol, in any form that her son could ingest. She later enrolled her son in GW Pharmaceuticals' expanded access program. And though his seizures decreased, his doctor believed that despite cannabidiol's benign side effect profile, the risks of using a Schedule I drug weren't worth the benefits and removed him from the program. Mrs. Jacobson is still trying to find a safe and reliable form of cannabidiol to treat her son, but is worried about a lack of data, the high variability in oils, dosing, and cannabidiol's potential interaction with other medications. All of this points to the need for research and regulation. Ms. Jacobson strongly believes that in dealing with epilepsy, and this is her quote, "Caution must be exercised when learning about the therapeutic effects and potential risks of a new treatment," end quote. Now, despite promising anecdotal evidence, we actually know very little about cannabidiol because there is limited research. And as the chairman mentioned, what we learned was a conflict between the Department of Justice and the Department of Health, which prevented that research being done because it was a Schedule I drug. And so the letter that we wrote essentially achieved a breakthrough in that restriction. And so now the federal research can go ahead. The positive development will ensure that privately funded marijuana research is now treated on par with other Schedule I substances. I was also encouraged to learn that the federal government is currently funding 12 studies on the potential therapeutic benefits of cannabidiol. But as a whole, current restrictions, particularly those related to changes in approved quantity and research protocol, as well as those limiting the cultivation of research-grade marijuana to one physical location, may well inhibit that research. In my view, with additional research, we can better understand if the apparent immediate benefits of cannabidiol outweigh any potential long-term harms. Unfortunately, the lack of research and burdensome regulations have forced parents to rely on each other, and even social media sites like Facebook, instead of doctors, to determine whether the use of cannabidiol to treat their children, and if so, what the proper dosage is. This is an untenable situation. It is not how medicine should work. Many give their children CDB because nothing else has worked, but they worry because these products aren't regulated or factory sealed and often aren't even labeled. Parents could pay up to $2,500 a month for a 1-month supply. On top of that enormous cost, they have to pay an additional fee to an independent lab to confirm that they received the product that was advertised. Sometimes the lab results confirm this, and sometimes they don't. There is no consistency. This is not acceptable. We've got to do more to ensure that parents have access to safe, effective medicines for their children, and that starts with better scientific and medical research. So I'm very hopeful that the letter that the chairman and I have written really allows the kind of federal as well as private research that's necessary to really form the basis so that science and medicine can enact the proper doses, the proper uses, whether it should be prescription or not, all of that has yet to be determined. So I hope today's hearing, rather than bring about emotion, will really bring about fact and science and the best path we can follow. I think every member of the Senate would want cannabidiol, assuming it meets the research criteria, to be available on the market in a precise and scientifically regulated manner. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and look forward to the hearing.
Yeah. Before I introduce guests, there's a lot of interest in this issue beyond the caucus, and so we have invited other people to participate, and I would ask them to make opening statements if they want to. I hope it won't be too long, but I'll start here with Senator Hatch and then go to Senator Gillibrand, Senator Booker, and Senator Schumer.
Well, thank you, Senator Grassley, for allowing me to step in and make a brief statement. I'm heartened by the attention this issue is receiving. CBD has shown tremendous promise in reducing the devastating effects of epilepsy. It offers hope to thousands of children nationwide who each day endure terrifying, uncontrollable seizures. It offers hope as well to parents who must endure the repeated agony of helplessly watching as their children suffer seizure after seizure after seizure. Ask Paige Fiji, whose 8-year-old daughter Charlotte suffered as many as 300 grand mal seizures per week before starting treatment with CBD. And she will tell you that CBD is a lifesaver. After Charlotte started taking CBD, her seizures dropped dramatically. She now suffers on average less than 3 seizures per month and is able to engage in normal childhood activities. Now, I understand the desire for caution. We're Congress. We act slowly, but we must remember that these are people whose lives we're dealing with. These are people for whom a 5 or 10-year delay is not an inconvenience, but a potential death sentence. Given that CBD produces no psychoactive effect, I frankly see no reason why it should remain illegal under federal law. Our nation's drug laws exist to protect us from the dangerous addictive effects of mind-altering substances. We restrict access to cocaine, meth, and other drugs because they take control of people's lives and lead them to do unpredictable, unsafe things. But CBD is not like any of those substances. It does not produce any sort of high. It is not addictive. To the contrary, it has shown promise in treating addiction. Rather than harming families, it can help make their lives better. Parents who wish to obtain CBD to treat their suffering children, however, risk federal prosecution for the sole reason that CBD is derived from the cannabis plant. Never mind that it produces no high, never mind that it actually counteracts the effects of THC. Under current law, because it is derived from the cannabis plant, it is unlawful. To remedy this situation, I've recently co-sponsored bipartisan legislation with Senators Gardner, Wyden, Alexander, and others to exempt CBD from the definition of marijuana under federal law. Our bill, S. 1333, will allow parents to obtain this life-changing therapy without threat of federal prosecution. It will enable parents, if they choose, to use a therapy that has shown great success in reducing seizures in children for whom all other treatments have failed. Now, I want to reiterate that CBD cannot be used to get high. That point is critical. It's what differentiates CBD from all of these other attempts to legalize marijuana, whether for medical purposes or otherwise. Nor is CBD a camel's nose in the tent for advocates of full marijuana legalization. 15 states have now legalized CBD. These include some of the most rock-ribbed conservative states in the country, such as Alabama, Oklahoma, and Texas. In fact, my home state of Utah, certainly no redoubt of hippie liberalism, was the very first state to legalize CBD. Now, I continue to oppose marijuana and efforts to legalize its use. I remain unconvinced by claims that it is safe and that the side effects it causes are no big deal. Stories of children being rushed to the hospital for accidentally consuming marijuana edibles belie the notion that marijuana is a safe drug. In fact, I am currently working on legislation to help protect children from the dangers of edible marijuana products. But I also believe that when a drug is safe and can improve people's lives, Congress should not stand in the way. That CBD is derived from the cannabis plant does not mean we should be scared to have anything to do with it. Legalizing CBD is a compassionate, common-sense move that will bring relief to thousands of suffering children nationwide. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad I've been able to make those statements.
Yeah, thank you. Now, Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley and Ranking Member Feinstein, for holding this very important hearing and inviting me to participate. I first came to this issue of medical marijuana when parents of children suffering from seizure disorders began to contact my office for help in accessing a strain of cannabis known as CBD. As we've already heard today, and we'll hear from our witnesses, CBD can reduce the number of seizures patients experience. The benefits are dramatic. Children's brains and bodies can actually develop, they can learn, and they can play. Children can be children. I'll speak more about families I've met in a moment, but I also wanted to note that CBD is just one strain of cannabis that has medical benefit for a variety of illnesses affecting our constituents. I've submitted added testimony today on that. While outside the scope of today's hearing, it's important in our consideration of medical marijuana reform. I appreciate the caucus's consideration of that testimony. Over the past few months, I've met with many families from across New York State and the nation who desperately need access to medical marijuana. These are mothers and fathers whose children are suffering every single day from diseases like Dravet syndrome and epilepsy. These are young boys and girls who have hundreds of seizures a day. Their development is delayed because they experience so many seizures. But while doctors advise that CBD would alleviate the number of seizures, parents risk violating federal law just to administer the medicine prescribed and can face arrest and the loss of custody. I'm a parent. I have 2 young boys. I know many of you in this caucus are also parents. I personally cannot imagine the pain and frustration that these families endure when confronted with this choice. Earlier this year, we received a letter from a mother named Missy, whose son Oliver, who I've met, suffers from a seizure disorder. She wrote a letter for our committee, and she wrote, Oliver had a planned trip for a long time to perform at Disney World with his school's percussion group. It was supposed to be one of the highlights of his life. But as is our life with refractory seizures, he's been seizing and sedated from all rescue meds this whole trip. It's heartbreaking for me to watch this endless torture. The last time we were here at Disney World, Oliver could still walk. He could still sit up in rides. He could still enjoy being in a pool. That was 2 years ago. This is what the seizures have taken from him in just 2 years. This trip, he can no longer walk. He can't sit unsupported in any ride. He could not tolerate the pool, and he seized through his favorite ride. Please remember him and represent him and so many others like him. This mother and thousands of other parents just like her, they're simply asking Congress to do its job, to take care of America's families by letting doctors determine what their patients need. State lawmakers across the country have already recognized what the medical community is telling us, that cannabis can treat a variety of illnesses, from MS to cancer to epilepsy to seizures. 23 states, plus Washington, D.C., have already passed laws to legalize medical marijuana. But none of that matters because our outdated federal laws preempt any of the state laws. The recognition that the regulations are behind the science is growing here in Washington. Committees in both the House and Senate have passed amendments to expand access to medical marijuana. And just this week, the White House proposed a new rule to lift long-standing obstacles to medical marijuana research. But until we change our federal law, doctors cannot prescribe this medicine to children who need it, even in states where it's legal. Until we change the federal laws, scientists will still face barriers to researching medical marijuana and the most effective way to use it, even in states where it's legal. Until we change the federal laws, parents like Missy are stuck watching their children suffer through hundreds of seizures a day, even in states where medical marijuana is legal. Let's do our jobs. Let's pass a new, modern law on medical marijuana that respects state laws, that respects modern scientific research, and that respects our families. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Senator Gillibrand. Now, Senator Booker.
Chairman Grassley, I'm grateful for you holding this. I'm grateful also to co-chair Feinstein. We've heard now from multiple senators about the agonizing reality of not having CBD legally recognized. Despite painful, obvious benefits of CBD recognition from 38 states, 38 of our nation's 50 states, that it has medical benefits, the federal government is lacking woefully behind, and this is simply unacceptable. The fact that federal law conflicts with states on access to CBD is just not a small issue. There is an urgency here. There is a moral urgency here. To access the CBD treatment they need, many people put themselves at considerable legal risk. If people don't access CBD, they put their health in jeopardy. They are caught in a terrible trap. I've talked to New Jerseyans about this catch-22, and I know the incredible stress it puts on families, the pain, the agony, the concern, the worry. Today, conventional treatments are often fail Americans afflicted with serious conditions and diseases. We have heard heartbreaking stories of children suffering from Dravet syndrome and other forms of intractable epilepsy who are unable to find medicine that is able to sufficiently control their seizures. We have heard, and we do know, how CBD and THC are the only drugs that often are able to control these conditions. We have heard stories about parents moving from their home states because of restrictive state and federal medical marijuana laws, literally becoming refugees in other states away from their homes, away from families, communities, and neighborhoods. This issue has real impact on the lives of ordinary Americans. My staff met with Jeannie Stroms, a woman recently forced to leave my home state of New Jersey because of our restrictive medical marijuana laws. Mrs. Storm's son, Jackson, suffers from Dravet syndrome, a severe and debilitating form of epilepsy. Without medication, Jackson can have multiple seizures in a day. This condition has affected his development and put him through a tremendous amount of pain. Jeannie Storms and her family experienced many hardships living in a state where it's hard to gain access to the medication Jackson needs. Jackson has tried 23 different drugs in 60-plus different combinations, but nothing has worked to control his seizures. Medical marijuana was the first drug that controlled his seizures and changed their lives. Unfortunately, Jeannie announced her family moved to Colorado because in New Jersey, it was too difficult to access the medication they needed for Jackson to stay alive. This, to me, is unconscionable. It is an affront to what our nation believes in. It is an affront to our common values and our collective aspirations for family and our children. No child in America with a debilitating disease deserves to have a life path, a life of pain, especially when there is treatment options available. It is time to take action. Waiting months, years, or even days causes unnecessary hardship, burden, and injury to families like the Storms. They have to be able to access the medication they need. This hearing is limited to access of CBD. It is a drug now that is a Schedule I drug that has severe limitations, while other drugs like methadone, oxycodone, methamphetamines, and even cocaine are Schedule II. As was said by my colleague, CBD does not have any of the effects of the overall marijuana plant that we discussed, none of the ability to get high on that drug. It is simply one that should be in sight. But I do not want to lose sight. I do not want to lose sight of the bigger issue as well, that millions of Americans are in the precarious position because of the federal government's position on overall medical marijuana, not just CBD. I'm grateful for the chairman and for Chairwoman Feinstein for their willingness to consider the whole issue as a whole. And I'm hopeful that as we look at CBD, we can also expand our vision to other Americans who are dealing with severe diseases and conditions that can be addressed by the medical application of marijuana, which is a Schedule I drug. I believe it is time for us to act. I'm confident that if we do the right thing, we can relieve the suffering of thousands of Americans. And it would allow doctors to help others in our Veterans Affairs facilities as well. I thank all the witnesses who were here today for their testimony. I thank the families and other concerned Americans who have come for this important hearing. And again, I end by saying thank you again to the chair and the co-chair for their work and their focus on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Booker. I'll introduce our first panel. I'll introduce all three at one time. We welcome back Joe Ranazizi. He is the deputy, and because he's appeared here several times, thank you for coming back. He is Deputy Assistant Administrator, Office of Division Control within the Drug Enforcement Administration. He holds a BS degree in pharmacy from Butler and a JD from the Detroit College of Law at Michigan State University. He's a registered pharmacist in the state of Indiana and a member of the Michigan State Bar Association. Next is Dr. Douglas Throckmorton, Deputy Director, Center for Drug Evaluation Research at FDA. Dr. Throckmorton has worked for the FDA since 1997, has been in his current role since 2004. He also serves as chair of the FDA's Drug Safety Oversight Board. Before starting his FDA career, Dr. Throckmorton practiced medicine and held academic appointments at Medical College of Georgia and the VA Medical Center, Augusta, Georgia. The last witness on the first panel, Dr. Nora Volkoff, Director of National Institute of Drug Abuse within the Department of HHS. She's held the position since 2003. Her work has been instrumental in demonstrating that drug addiction is a disease of the brain. She has published more than 580 peer-review articles and written more than 90 book chapters and non-peer review manuscripts. So she's been very, very busy writing. In addition, she has been the recipient of multiple awards for her work in addiction science. She earned her medical degree, National University of Mexico, Mexico City. We'll do it in that order, so would you go ahead, Mr. Ranazizi?
Thank you, Chairman Grassley, Co-Chairman Feinstein, and distinguished members and staff. On behalf of Acting Administrator Chuck Rosenberg and the Drug Enforcement Administration, I appreciate the invitation to testify today regarding DEA's regulatory requirements for research with cannabidiol, or CBD. DEA shares the goal of bringing relief to patients suffering from intractable seizure conditions. We support research to ensure that patients will have access to safe and effective medicines. At the same time, we acknowledge that the process for approving and conducting research with any Schedule I controlled substance can be lengthy, which understandably may seem frustrating to those seeking immediate relief for their loved ones. But discussions such as this one today are a good opportunity to have dialogue on the balance we are seeking to not only address the public's desire to improve public health, but also to ensure that adequate safeguards are in place to prevent diversion and abuse of Schedule I controlled substances. As I will discuss in further detail during my testimony, I want to note up front some important ways in which DEA is helping support research and patients. First, as the caucus has requested, DEA will work with HHS to evaluate CBD's Schedule I status under the Controlled Substances Act. Second, DEA has a policy to expedite applications for CBD research. In fact, there are 41 researchers who are actively conducting research with CBD, up from 16 less than 1 year ago. And we're also reviewing the regulations concerning researchers to determine whether revisions are appropriate and necessary. Lastly, DEA is working to ensure that there's sufficient supply of marijuana available to approve researchers to perform additional studies on CBD. CBD is a Schedule I controlled substance due to the statutory definition of the term marijuana established by Congress. The CSA provides for a process by which researchers can obtain Schedule I controlled substances for research purposes, including human trials designed to determine whether these substances have a therapeutic use. Although there is an ongoing research, which DEA supports, Products containing CBD have not undergone all the testing required under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to prove that they are safe and effective for treatment in the United States. We welcome these ongoing studies and will continue to work with Congress and our federal partners here today to do what we can to facilitate the work. DEA has a limited but important role in improving research with CBD. When a practitioner seeks to conduct research with cannabidiol, DEA facilitates an interagency review of the research application. FDA is charged with determining the qualifications and competency of the applicant, as well as the scientific merits of the protocol, while DEA ensures that there are effective procedures in place to safeguard against diversion. An application to conduct research with CBD is approved when both reviews have been completed. In fact, every researcher who has put forth a valid research protocol and is in compliance with the CSA has received a Schedule I research registration. DEA has never denied a bona fide application for any Schedule I research registration. Today, we have nearly 400 active researchers registered with DEA to conduct studies in Schedule I controlled substances. Of those, 265 are registered to conduct research with marijuana, and of those, 41 are actively conducting research with CBD. This number is up from 16 less than a year earlier. Those researchers who have modified their registration to include research with CBD have, on average, been processed within 36 days. DEA currently has 33 pending research registration applications for CBD. Although this number is high, it's important to note that 100% of these applications are incomplete and the application has not obtained approval from their organization's Institutional Review Board, or IRB. DEA will continue to work with these applicants, and when we receive the necessary IRB approval from the applicant, we'll continue our policy of expediting these applications. And just for the IRB is basically designed, the Institutional Review Board is designed to protect the patient, protect the researcher, and also to protect the institution. In addition to our efforts to expedite CBD registration approvals, we've also worked with Dr. Volkoff's staff at NIDA to increase the quota necessary to cultivate additional marijuana to support research using CBD. In May 2014, the aggregate production quota was raised from 21 kilograms to 650 kilograms for that purpose. Again, in 2015, we've raised the aggregate from 125 kilograms to 658 kilograms, but this increase was due to support those manufacturers seeking to bring FDA-approved drug products containing CBD to the market. Finally, as members of the caucus have requested, DEA will work with HHS to evaluate CBD's Schedule I status under the CSA. To accomplish this, DEA will initiate the review of CBD and request from HHS a scientific and medical evaluation and scheduling recommendation for CBD. In conclusion, we're fully committed to supporting the lawful research involving marijuana and CBD while also ensuring compliance with the Controlled Substances Act. DEA will continue to work with HHS to review and streamline Schedule I research registration process and will continue to seek new opportunities for improvement. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. Now, Dr. Throckmorton.
Chairman Grassley, Co-Chairman Feinstein, members of the caucus, I'm Dr. Douglas Throckmorton, Deputy Director for Regulatory Programs in the Center for Drug Evaluation Research at the FDA. Thank you for this opportunity to be here today to discuss the important role FDA plays in supporting appropriate and scientific research into the medical promise of marijuana and cannabidiol. Marijuana contains compounds such as cannabidiol with potential to provide important new treatments for serious diseases, and rigorous studies are needed to assess that potential. To accomplish this, FDA, like the other panelists, believes that it is important for us to identify and address any barriers that might hinder the conduct of that research wherever possible. FDA continues to believe that the best way to ensure that safe and effective new medicines from marijuana, including those containing cannabidiol, are available as soon as possible for the largest numbers of American patients. FDA is the agency that is responsible for the assessment and regulation of new drugs in the United States, including drugs derived from plants, like marijuana. The Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act required that those drugs be shown to be safe, effective for their intended use before being marketed. In addition, drugs must be shown to be manufactured consistently, lot to lot, with high quality. Because many factors influence the makeup of plant materials, such as temperature, time of year, location grown, this essential part of drug development presents special challenges when the drug is derived from a botanical source like marijuana. To address these challenges, FDA has published guidance to investigators to give recommendations about the types of studies to be conducted when developing drugs from plants. Guidance we believe is helping clear a path to efficient drug development. FDA also works very closely. I have a team dedicated to working with individuals developing drugs from plants throughout their development plan to make sure that they know the right path, they can do what they need to do. Recently, for example, FDA has had that team working with public health officials from several states considering support for medical research into cannabidiol to provide scientific advice and support. In addition to working directly with investigators to support their studies, FDA has several mechanisms to apply specific drug development programs to facilitate and expedite their development. Programs such as fast-track designation, accelerated approval, priority review, and breakthrough designation. Wherever possible, we are applying these tools to the development of products derived from marijuana and cannabidiol. For example, fast-track designation was granted to an investigational cannabidiol product, Epidiolex, being developed for a rare form of childhood epilepsy. One goal of these expedited mechanisms is to speed drug availability for patients. I have also personally spoken to parents seeking help for their sick children and understand the importance of making investigational products available to patients while they are under study for approval. To make this possible, FDA has put in place expanded access programs to give patients access to investigational drugs where appropriate and where the manufacturer chooses to participate. As has been said earlier, the makers of Epidiolex containing cannabidiol report that 20 Epidiolex intermediate-size expanded access programs have been authorized to treat approximately 420 children. Importantly, these children are getting access to an investigational product under close medical supervision, and the data obtained from their use of the investigational agent is being collected to help support drug development. While doing what we can to speed the pace of development for promising investigational drug therapies, we are also mindful of protecting consumers. In February of 2015, FDA took action against marketed unapproved drug products that were making egregious health claims, including products that allegedly contain cannabidiol and other compounds from marijuana. For example, products containing cannabidiol were advertised nationally, making unsubstantiated claims as being effective in the treatment of conditions such as breast cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, and Ebola infection. In addition, as a part of this action, we analyzed the products and found that many did not even contain the ingredients listed on their labels. For example, when we tested products that allegedly contained cannabidiol, around 1/3 of those products, in fact, contained no cannabidiol on careful testing. Marketing of products that make unsubstantiated claims or do not contain the proper amounts of ingredients, such as cannabidiol, does more than simply defraud consumers. These products and their marketing can create false hope in those seeking relief from serious medical conditions for themselves or their loved one. Moreover, it can divert patients from products with demonstrated safety and effectiveness. To conclude my remarks, FDA, on its own and in partnership with other federal agencies, strongly supports the need for additional research into the therapeutic promise of marijuana, and in particular cannabidiol. As evidence of this partnership, I'd highlight the recent decision to abolish the Public Health Service review of investigators seeking marijuana for research. For its part, FDA is committed to using the tools we have to encourage that research and also to identify and address any barriers to research wherever possible, as a part of FDA's mission to assure that safe and effective medicines are available for the American public. Thank you, and I would be happy to answer any questions I can.
Thank you, Dr. Throckmorton. Now, Dr. Volkov.
Good morning, Chairman Grassley, Co-Chairman Feinstein. I want to thank you for the opportunity to come and speak with you about the science and the therapeutic potential of cannabidiol. Cannabidiol, or CBD, is one of the more than 80 cannabinoids present in the marijuana plant. Cannabinoids exert their effects via the endogenous cannabinoid system through activation of cannabinoid receptors CB1 and CB2. Our body natural endocannabinoid system regulates many functions, including stress, eating, sleep, and memory. The rewarding and addictive effects of marijuana are mediated by delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, through its activation of CB1 receptors. On the other hand, cannabidiol has a very low affinity for these receptors, at least 100 times less than that of THC, and is devoid of rewarding or pleasurable effects. Instead, its consumption has been associated with sedation and sometimes aversive subjective effects. Many of the therapeutic effects of marijuana have been ascribed in part to cannabidiol. Cannabidiol interacts with many molecular targets, and the mechanisms underlying its pharmacological effects, including its potential therapeutic actions, are still poorly understood. Preclinical research has indeed suggested that CBD may have a range of therapeutic effects, most notable of which are anti-seizure, neuroprotective, anti-inflammatory, analgesic, anti-tumor, antipsychotic, and anti-anxiety relieving properties. Most of the recent public interest has focused on the potential value of CBD in the treatment of seizure disorders. And indeed, multiple studies using animal models have shown that CBD reduces the severity of seizures, and ongoing studies are investigating its mechanism of action. In the meantime, clinical case studies and reports from patients have provided suggestive evidence that CBD may be effective in treating children with drug-resistant epilepsy. Currently, more than 400 children are receiving Epidiolex, a purified CBD extract, under an expanded access program, and the descriptive results are also encouraging. However, proof of therapeutic efficacy requires demonstrations with large randomized clinical trials that controls for unexpected effects. Currently, only 4 very small clinical trials that have been randomized have been published. And these have been done in adult patients with seizure disorders for a total of 48 patients. And though in 3 of them, the results are positive, the evidence is insufficient to arrive to a firm conclusion. This is likely to change in the near future, as there are several ongoing clinical trials, including those by GW Pharmaceutical, to test the efficacy of Epidiolex in pediatric epilepsy. When completed, these studies should provide additional evidence to inform whether and in whom CBD has therapeutic benefits for seizures. NIH identified CBD as an interesting target for therapeutics that extend beyond its value as an anti-seizure medication and recognizes the need for additional research to accelerate translation into therapeutics. At NIH, studies related to the therapeutic effects of cannabinoids, including CBD, are not only happening to NIDA, where our focus is on their use for the treatment of substance use disorders, addiction, and for the management of pain. Other NIH institutes are funding work on the therapeutic value of cannabinoids, including CBD, in the treatment of neurological, psychiatric, immunological, metabolic, and oncological disorders. In addition, research is ongoing to develop formulations that can deliver CBD in more effective ways, for example, via inhalation. In conclusion, it appears that CBD is a safe drug with no addictive effects. The preliminary data suggests that CBD may have therapeutic value for a number of medical conditions. Addressing barriers that slow clinical research with CBD would accelerate progress. And NIDA will continue to work closely with our sister agencies to address these challenges. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you very much. We'll have 7-minute rounds of questioning. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Volkoff. The NIDA is the agency responsible for providing researchers with marijuana to support CBD research. NIDA does so by contracting with the University of Mississippi to grow multiple strains of marijuana, and recently NIDA, in consultation with the Drug Enforcement Administration, dramatically increased the supply of research marijuana grown at the university. However, there is still a question about whether the arrangement as it currently exists will continue to meet the needs for research-grade marijuana. Do you believe that it would be beneficial to allow NIDA, in coordination with the DEA, to grant more than one contract to improve entities to grow marijuana for research?
Could you turn on your mic?
Yeah.
The answer is yes. I think it would be beneficial.
Okay. Now I go to Mr. Ranazizi and Dr. Throckmorton. In the 1980s, a drug called Marinol was developed to treat the loss of appetite that caused weight loss in AIDS and cancer patients. Marinol contains a synthetic version of a compound found in marijuana. While it was still in developing, Marinol was part of a special Group C investigational new drug program. Through the program, over 20,000 patients over 4 years received the drug to treat cancer-related symptoms. I'd like both of you to explain if such a program could be created today for CBD-based medicines such as Epidiolex to treat children with intractable epilepsy. Are there any laws or regulations that would prevent that step? Start with you, Mr. Ranazizi.
Chairman Grassley, if I could defer to my colleague,
Okay.
Dr. Throckmorton. I think Dr. Throckmorton's better equipped to answer that.
Would you go ahead?
Absolutely. I'm familiar with that program, and it is a precursor to the current expanded access program. So you can think of it as in that same mechanism. And so, yes, absolutely, a similar program exists today. That's the program under expanded access through that the 400 children are using to get access to Epidiolex now. It's a program set up by the manufacturer to work with an individual physician or medical center to allow access to an investigational product. In the case of Marinol, it was the investigational product. In this case, it would be Epidiolex. But yes, that mechanism exists. It's now the expanded access program that we have today.
Is there any reason that more children couldn't be enrolled in that program? I think you mentioned 400. Is there any reason more children couldn't be enrolled?
Well, there are a few things that need to be put in place to have a child eligible to be enrolled in it. One, a manufacturer has to make the decision to set up an expanded access program. In this case, GW Pharmaceuticals has made that decision, and so they're making the product available. The product is available under medical supervision, so it requires that the patient be under care of a physician to watch for side effects, to monitor for adverse effects and efficacy and those things, and report them back to us. It also requires that the institutional review boards that Mr. Anassisi mentioned be aware of that and approve the administration of this investigational drug to the patient. The fourth thing for a controlled substance like this is that the manufacturer would need to work with the DEA and make certain that there was authorization to manufacture enough of that controlled substance, and I know that the DEA has made that step possible in this case. So that's not an issue here today. But so as long as those four conditions are met, and so long as some other reporting requirements and things are met by the manufacturer, FDA has approved 99% of these expanded access programs since 2010. We don't get in the way, and they're being used broadly.
Again, Dr. Throckmorton, there are legislative proposals before Congress to change marijuana from Schedule 1 to 2. Some believe that these proposals would make CBD products being sold on the black market immediately available under federal law. This is my last question. Would moving marijuana to Schedule 2 change the legal requirements that CBD-based medicines, like all medicines, have to be approved by the DEA and the FDA before being prescribed by doctors? And if not, could you describe the federal regulations that would govern the approval process for even a medicine developed from a Schedule II substance?
So I don't want to speak about specific legislation that's out there, but I will say that action that would simply change marijuana from Schedule 1 to some other schedule would not affect the drug development and approval process. So that would be an action that would impact the Controlled Substances Act, and it would affect the controls over marijuana that would be used in that way, but it would not impact the controls that the FDA uses under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, controls regarding safety, efficacy, patient exposure, manufacturing quality. Those things would still be in place. The major impact then would be on the controls that would be in place over research. And I think that's one of the interests that the group has, that we're interested in talking about today, and is finding a way to make certain that research progresses as efficiently as possible. And there has been a perception that being in Schedule 1 makes it more difficult because there are additional controls in those products. So I think the major impact would be in that way. The impact on drug development, from my perspective, then would mostly be in terms of making it potentially easier to study drugs for their approval, which is, after all, what I'm really interested in.
Okay. Senator Feinstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Throckmorton, taking it from the chairman's questions, you said the prescription, the perception is that Schedule 1 makes it more difficult. Does it?
Well, there are additional controls. I think, as Mr. Anasisi said, there are...
Can you answer that, yes or no?
There are additional steps. So to the extent that those additional steps exist, they are additional things that need to happen.
Okay, now this company, GW, that the 400 children are utilizing the cannabidiol, are the doses standardized? Are they by prescription? How does it work?
Absolutely, and I should have made that clearer. Thank you for that question. Absolutely, and it's one of the really important things about the Expanded Access Program is it takes place in the context of a drug development program. So GW Pharmaceuticals has developed a formulation of cannabidiol with dosing and manufacturing information and all of the things that we'd expect for a drug that you take every day or are given in a hospital or something like that. And then they're using that exact same product, the same product that they would hopefully be able to market once they provided the clinical trials to us. That's the product being given to the children under the Expanded Access Program.
Is there oversight?
Absolutely.
And can that program be expanded now?
The only limitation
to as necessary by prescription of a doctor?
The limitations on it are the ones that I'd mentioned before, which is the manufacturer's control of this. So the FDA can't force a manufacturer to do this or not do this. This is something that they have chosen to do. There needs to be a physician that's able to supervise the patient to make certain that the adverse events are identified.
So
and
the answer
protection
is yes.
Absolutely.
Well, that's very good news, I think. And my sense is that the Senate would certainly support that.
We've had a very good relationship, working very closely with this manufacturer. I have an expanded access group that is trying to do anything we can to help them.
Right. Well, I think that's very good to hear. Let me ask you this, and Mr. Ranazisi, I don't know which one of you is the best. I understand that our country has a patent on cannabinoids, including CBD, which states that, and let me quote, non-psychoactive cannabinoids such as CBD are particularly advantageous to use because they avoid toxicity that is encountered with psychoactive cannabinoids. How, if in any way, will that patent factor into the scientific and medical evaluation? Perhaps it doesn't. I don't know. Or what GW is doing.
Yeah, so maybe I could take that one.
Okay.
That patent is through the NIH, and I am not a patent lawyer or play one on television. So but the standards for getting a patent, including the standards that would have been required for them to get that patent, are fundamentally different than the standards that would be required for a drug approval. So them having that patent does not influence in any way the development of the drug containing cannabidiol.
And the other thing about the patent is that because it's a patent that is done through the NIH, is specifically for the potential of cannabidiol as an antioxidant, and therefore its neuroprotective effects. So it will not affect in any way its potential therapeutic effects as an anti-seizure.
So the government will keep the patent rights? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but it will not, it has nothing to do with anti-seizure. It's very specific for neuroprotection as it relates to its antioxidant effects.
Right. One last question. So you've got 400 children. It is possible to expand it. The FDA would support expansion. Is there any restriction, not restriction, but any rule at which point clinical trials must be done?
Well, there are clinical trials ongoing. In fact, I believe...
But they're limited. It's 48 people, if I understand the testimony today.
So I think the 48 people refer to publications that have been...
Is that right? Sorry.
Correct, published and completed.
So I think it's...
How many are in clinical trials at this time?
I can get you that information, but
If you could,
it's
we'd
public.
appreciate
It's
it.
publicly available knowledge that GW Pharmaceuticals has enrolled fully 2 trials of children for severe seizure disorders, and they're hoping to have some results from those trials. Those clinical trials are important because they're going to form the data that the FDA is going to be able to use to look at the efficacy and safety of the product while we make it available under the expanded access program. So you could think of it as the controlled trials going on. While that's occurring, expanded access program makes that same material, that same investigational drug available to patients.
Well, for whatever it's worth, I'm really pleased that FDA is taking that position and allowing expansion. Can you give us a time expectation as to when this substance could be legally distributed? Well, I guess it can be legally distributed now, but the distribution could be expanded as any other drug?
Do you mean approved for prescription use?
Correct.
I wouldn't be able to give you a specific timeline. I mean, the company has been talking to the review division that handles these kinds of products, and they're working hard to do the studies that we've outlined for them they need to conduct. And once those studies are done, we've, as I've said, planned to exercise any of our authorities we have to expedite the review of those to make certain that we bring the product to market as quickly as we can. There are several studies that are needed, including these studies on the efficacy and safety of them in the children with seizure disorders. I look forward to those studies as much as anyone.
Well, that's good. We'll be very interested in following it, so thank you. Senator Gillibrand?
How many patients nationwide need access to CBD? Estimate?
I don't have that information.
Is it tens of thousands? Is it hundreds of thousands? Is it hundreds? I just need to know, because 400 patients I know is not even meeting the need for New York State. So how many patients need access to medicine?
Well, the challenge is that we have many medicines approved for the treatment of seizure disorders. We recognize they have side effects. We recognize that not all of them work in all patients. So to identify the subgroup of individuals that have tried all of those and they're not working for them, I wouldn't have an estimate. It's many patients. Rather than trying to decide what that number is, I really, my job is to get a product developed.
I don't want to limit the access to CBD to one drug company. It is absurd that we're saying that's going to solve the problem. So what I hear from you is that having this one drug company who's got 400 patients, we're solving the problem. That's outrageous. That's an outrageous impression to leave on this committee, because you have thousands of patients in my state alone who need access to this medicine, and they don't all get accepted by the drug trials. And when you talk to a parent and they tell you, yeah, the other medicines that are approved for my kid are barbiturates that knock him out and put him in a coma-like state, that's not a quality of life I'd want for any child. So let's be clear. We need to change the laws to remove impediments so we have research being conducted across the country, as is being done in other countries like Canada and Israel. We cannot have only one place where this plant can be grown. It needs to be distributed more widely so people can get access to the materials they need to do the research. We have to change the schedule. You said Schedule 1 to Schedule 2 releases impediments. What are those impediments? Explain to us what is the difference between Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 in terms of a researcher's ability to research this drug and a drug company's ability to produce a medicine that has the protections that Senator Feinstein needs for her constituents?
Be happy to talk about the one particular role that Schedule I has in terms of the FDA, and then I'd ask Mr. Anastasi to talk about the DEA's role. So when a Schedule I product is being studied, they have to report to us any changes in their protocol. So if they've done a clinical trial and they are enrolling a number of patients and they're following it for 6 weeks, and they decide that they need to change the conditions of that study so that instead of, I don't know, whatever, 3 weeks, it's going to be followed for 4 weeks, something like that. Typically, those changes come into us, but unless the trial is allowed to continue to go forward. For controlled substances, for Schedule I substances, there's a review that's required. The DEA sends that protocol change to us. We are on a 30-day clock to look at that and get an answer back to the DEA, and then the DEA goes back to that investigator and says, yes, the trial can go forward.
Is it fair to say the process is very cumbersome?
Well, so it is not a straight, there is that additional step, this additional exchange that has to happen that doesn't occur for products that are in different schedules and less controlled schedules.
Between 1 and 2 is that 1 says there are no medical uses, and 2 says there may be medical uses, but they need to be researched. Is that correct?
The definition for Schedule II is actually Schedule II products have a high risk of abuse, think opioids and things, but have an accepted medical use.
And what are some acceptable medical use for opiates? What are the examples?
Well, accepted medical use for opiates, they're indicated for the treatment of pain.
Oxycodone, Oxycontin, all these are derivatives of opiates, correct?
That's right. They're approved by the FDA for indications like treatment of pain and cancer and things like that.
So, Mr. Ranazizi, please give us the FDA's perspective.
Excuse
me, the DEA's perspective.
The Schedule I researcher has to apply for a separate research registration. He submits protocols. The protocols basically outline who he is, what his background is, then what his research is going to be, and under what authority he's doing that research. For instance, is he doing it with an institution? Is he doing it pursuant to an IND? We get that protocol, we submit it to FDA for approval, and once it's approved, it comes back to us. We ensure that he's got a secure container to keep his drugs in, and we explain the paperwork to him for procurement, and he gets his registration.
And where does he get procurement? Where can he procure?
CBD, he could go through the NIDA program and get it from Research Triangle, I believe, is the distributor, but it can come from Ole Miss as well.
So given that NIDA's mission is to lead the nation in bringing the power of science to bear on drug abuse and addiction, what specific steps is NIDA taking to advance research into the medical benefits of marijuana? To put it another way, how can NIDA control the research supply of medical marijuana studies that seek to find benefits when the mission is solely focused on the negative consequences of marijuana use and there is a better agency suited to handling the research supply of marijuana?
I'm going to answer that question because indeed one of the things that NIDA does is study the effects of drugs in the human brain. But the research is not just focused per se on the negative effects of marijuana. And in fact, as I very explicitly stated, we're very interested on doing research that relates to the potential benefits that cannabidiol may have on the treatment of drug addiction. We're also interested in understanding how cannabidiol or other cannabinoids may be utilized for the better management of pain, as well as for the potential management of patients suffering from HIV. As for your question in terms of we having the only source of research for marijuana, that's not something that NIDA chose to do.
Right.
There is a law that requires that we be that agency, and we comply with the law.
Okay. So for FDA, what is the FDA's approval process for marijuana now? Given that marijuana is a multi-compound botanical substance, is it reasonable to expect that marijuana could ever make it through the FDA approval process? If not, would it make sense to develop a new approval protocol for multi-compound botanical substances such as marijuana within the FDA?
It's absolutely reasonable to expect that marijuana would be able to be developed as a drug. We've done it before. We've approved other plant-derived drugs. We have guidance that we have put out. I have in place a team whose job it is to help developers with plants that want to develop drugs from them, to give them any advice and help that they can. So yes, there is a pathway laid out. Yes, it's been done.
What's the timing for that pathway currently?
Well, what we need is an academic, an interested investigator working with us and doing the studies that we need to have to be certain we have a product that's well characterized, that's studied appropriately in a patient population that we can identify. So I can give a prescription, I can tell a prescriber that they can prescribe that medicine to those patients.
So the current 400-person study, is that sufficient for you to begin the process?
This process begins with conversations about the drug itself. So in the case of a plant-derived product like a marijuana product, it would start with a discussion of how they want to develop it, what patients they want to study it in, what kinds of treatments they want to measure, what outcomes they think.
Is that happening with this company that you talked about?
That's already happened with this company. It happened, and any additional conversations they need, we're having. Any investigator that's interested in coming in and talking to us about developing a drug for marijuana, we have a process to put them into involving a discussion with the Right Review Division specifically to lay out what kinds of trial designs they'd need to use.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Booker?
So I want to start with NIDA. Am I pronouncing it as NIDA? NIDA? NIDA. I want to start with NIDA. They've maintained a monopoly on the production of marijuana for legitimate medical and research purposes in the U.S. In addition to DEA to help protect NIDA's monopoly by refusing to grant competitive licenses for marijuana production. So I just have some concerns about that monopoly, and is that serving in the best interests of our nation? If a certain researcher located in the United States wants to conduct research on marijuana, she has only one way to obtain it from NIDA. But despite the fact that it is not NIDA's mission to study the medical uses of marijuana or advocate for such research, NIDA's monopoly on cannabis supply available for research often results in arbitrary lengthy delays. For example, Chemic Labs, a DEA licensed analytical lab, had to wait more than 2 years for a reply to its initial request to purchase 10 grams of marijuana for privately sponsored research into vapors, a non-smoking delivery system that the Institute of Medicine report recommended be developed. And so are you concerned with NIDA's monopoly? And is it a barrier to research on medical marijuana?
That question earlier, and with the notion slightly differently phrased, saying if there were alternative sources of cannabidiol, would I support it? And the answer is yes, because it would make the research much more efficient. So some of these delays...
Yeah, I'm sorry, I only have 5 minutes, so I just want to get my answers
You
back.
have 7 minutes.
I have 5 left. So yes, in other words, efficiency, effectiveness, availability for research would be better if there was not a monopoly.
Correct.
Okay. And so does that monopoly exist for other Schedule I drugs?
Not to my knowledge.
Yes. So in other words, heroin, a Schedule I drug, despite having a lot more potential harm for users in marijuana, which is also a Schedule I marijuana drug, why would you treat heroin differently than you're treating pot? Why would that be? Is there any scientific reason whatsoever?
There is no scientific reason, no.
Right. And so that to me is infuriating right there, slowing down this process. And Dr., again, Throckmorton, I did well, huh? It's almost as difficult to pronounce as Booker. So the process that now has a choke, in my opinion, and confirmed by my questions, it's a chokehold on the ability for us to conduct research. Do you see that as a problem?
Yes, I think there are advantages to broad availability of a variety of different kinds of marijuana, and whether what the right answer to address that issue, I agree. Expanding the numbers of growers is one potential solution.
Okay, And so now we understand we've got a chokehold, we've got limitations on research, we've got years of delays in understanding this that could be addressed. Moving it to a Schedule II drug would or would not change this.
Moving it to a Schedule II drug, I think we talked a little about this before, would not affect the process for drug development under the Food and Drug and Cosmetics Act. What it would affect is the requirements, the controls over research. So the things that the investigators would need to do.
Sorry, sir, my time is limited. It would expand research. It would expand opportunities for research.
There are at least two reasons to think that it has the potential to do that. One would be changes in the requirements. The second possibility is a perceptional one, a perception that it is now easier, it is now something that an investigator could be interested in doing, could make a career of, or something, a sort of sense of the possible, sends a message that it's important to do this and it's possible to do it.
I'm going to take that as a yes, then. Really quickly, Ranazizi, forgive me that. 1 year ago, Senator Paul and I offered an amendment to a federal spending bill that would prohibit the Department of Justice and the DEA from using taxpayer money to undermine state medical marijuana laws. The amendment was ultimately inserted to the House and the Senate Omnibus Appropriations Act, which subsequently passed and signed into law. I'm concerned now, though, that the DEA is failing to implement this amendment and continuing to work barriers that prevent states from making CBD and other medicines available without federal interference. And so what steps is the DEA taking to implement this policy, and what assurances can you give that state medical marijuana laws are not being undermined by federal laws? Because as I see people moving out of my state to go to states so that they can get access to this medicine, I'm concerned that they still have the threat of the DEA enforcement.
I'm not aware of any effort to undermine that particular provision within the law. And I'll go back to the department and bring this up with the department.
Well, please do, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, sir. I've got 90 seconds. But in April, a spokesperson for the Justice Department told the Los Angeles Times the bipartisan medical marijuana amendment does not prevent it from prosecuting people for medical marijuana or seizing their property, including CBD. At the same time, the department continues to target people for prosecution who simply are complying with those laws. And so again, if you can find out for me, why does the department ignore the clear intent of Congress for the amendment to protect medical marijuana, including CBD patients, and providers from prosecution and forfeiture? I would like that question for the record.
I'll bring that up.
And so then I'd like to ask you finally about the rescheduling of marijuana and the impact research the impacted research of not being harmed by law enforcement. Do you see, in your opinion and your long law enforcement history, that moving this to a Schedule II would make an environment for the research and the provision of marijuana for research a lot easier?
In my opinion, based on my knowledge of the regulations, no. The only difference is the submission of the protocols, which would have to go, eventually they'd have to submit protocols or an IND to FDA anyway, so it would just not go through DEA. And the special registration, but if you're not a physician and you want to be an investigator, say a PhD pharmacologist who wants to participate in the investigation, he's going to have to get a registration. So,
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the time.
Yeah. Thanks this panel. I'll call the second panel now, but thank all of you for very useful testimony, and we'll probably continue to have dialogue with you individually.
thank you very much.
Yeah. While the second panel is coming, I'm going to, I would like to introduce the second panel while they're seated. Our first witness, Dr. John Ingram. Dr. Ingram is pediatric neurologist at the University of Mississippi Medical Center, preparing to conduct clinical trials on CBD. He serves as assistant professor of pediatrics there and is director of the Pediatrics Comprehensive Epilepsy Center. Dr. Ingram attended the University of Mississippi for both undergraduate and medical degrees, and at 15, he was diagnosed with epilepsy. Our second witness, Dr. Tom Minahan, he's Director, Emergency Medicine Residency and an attending physician at Arrowhead Regional Medical Center, Colton, California. He's been practicing medicine for 20 years. Dr. Minahan's daughter, Mallory, age 12, has suffered intractable seizures since she was 14 months old. Our final witness, Dr. Kevin Savet, he has studied, researched, and written about drug policy for 20 years, including serving as a drug policy advisor in Clinton, Bush, and Obama administration. He is currently Director of Drug Policy Institute, University of Florida, and serves as an assistant professor in the College of Medicine Department of Psychiatry. He is a co-author, along with former Congressman Patrick Kennedy, of Project SAM, or Smart Approaches to Marijuana. He is also the author of Reefer Sanity, 7 Great Myths About Marijuana. He received his doctorate of philosophy and Master of Science, Oxford University, as a Marshall Scholar. I suppose I should have asked Senator Feinstein if she had anything to say about her constituent.
Well, I would say I'm delighted that you're here, Doctor, and I look forward to your testimony, so thank you very much.
Can we go in the order that we introduced you, Dr. Ingram?
Absolutely. First, let me express my sincere appreciation for your consideration of this topic and your time today. These patients are often the most marginalized in both society and in healthcare, and so your time is significant and appreciated. Medically refractory epilepsy is not rare. In fact, of the 2.3 million Americans with epilepsy today, 1 million of them are uncontrolled. And we know, statistically speaking, if you fail 2 drugs currently on the market, you have less than a 10% chance of getting control of your epilepsy with medicine with what's on the market today. As these seizures steal away developmental milestones, as we've heard from you and from, well, I'm sure we'll hear from other people on this panel, as they steal away these milestones, the families of these children with intractable epilepsy watch, in some cases very quickly, as their child morphs into a shadow of who they once were. Drugs that I prescribe every day legally and with my Schedule II DEA license cause a widespread list of side effects, including cognitive impairment, blindness, liver and bone marrow failure, and even death. So there's a real thirst for novel therapies, both from the families and from the healthcare providers, even potentially risky ones, not in 5 or 10 years when permanent neurological damage has been done by their disease, but today. In recent years, anecdotal reports of profound success in using medical marijuana have created the impression that cannabis may be the panacea for this problem. But medical marijuana is not the accurate term for our discussion today. Of the more than 80 cannabinoids found in the marijuana plant, 2 are of particular interest. The first, THC, is the most well-known and major psychoactive component of marijuana. The second, CBD, or cannabidiol, is a non-psychoactive component that has come into focus in the past few years as a novel therapy for intractable epilepsy. Of significant concern to us in healthcare is the fact that in animal model, CBD appears to be anticonvulsant, while THC can be proconvulsant, causing seizures to get worse. In recent studies, there's a suggestion that early exposure to cannabis before age 15 increases the long-term risk of psychosis, lowers long-term IQ, and causes impairment of long-term executive function. Clinical and basic science research is limited due to CBD's assigned Schedule I status. Many state laws have attempted to bypass this, including my home state, but these laws do not take into account the hows and whys of actually obtaining CBD, much less the lack of clinical science behind it. This often creates frustration between hopeful families and uncertain healthcare providers, and has also led to families uprooting and moving to states with existing widespread medical marijuana legislation intact, allowing them to find CBD sources on their own, most typically outside of physician assistance. The overall lack of regulation of this product in these states and in the medical cannabis industry also raises significant concerns about what these children are actually taking. And this is not a hypothetical concern. As Dr. Throckmorton mentioned earlier, the FDA has issued warnings about 18 different advertised CBD products that did not actually contain significant CBD. 7 of these contained no CBD, and 2 of the ones that did, including the most potent compound, were actually marketed for the use in pets, in dogs and cats. We also struggle to contest with placebo effect and anecdotal reporting bias in the children and the families taking this product. There's an unusual side in this therapy, and that because marijuana is a plant, there seems to be a drive for artisanal or organic usage of this therapy over other medicines, and this potential does create concern for reporting bias results. Relative to all of this, in the past 2 years, the Epilepsy Foundation, American Epilepsy Society, AMA, and many others have released position statements with language supporting the rights of Americans with epilepsy to have access to physician-directed health care, including medical marijuana. This is coupled with calls for the DEA to end restrictions that limit research into medical marijuana for epilepsy, and that CBD's Schedule I ranking be reviewed as a barrier to research. In all statements, the gold standard of well-designed clinical research studies are called for. Let me be very clear, none of our professional organizations are calling for widespread legalization of marijuana, but rather for specific study-based evaluation of CBD and marijuana as a drug in the treatment of epilepsy. We at the University of Mississippi, in partnership with our parent University of Mississippi, are attempting to start a study on quality-controlled, naturally derived CBD that is different from Epidiolex. We hope to complete the process of getting a group IND, NIDA, and DA approval, and we currently have a waiting list of about 65 children anxiously awaiting the trial. At present, we have been advised by NIDA that we have 1 kilogram of product approved. This is with an option to extend to 30 kilograms if that is approved, and Oxford is more than capable of growing that product for us. With the amount of with 1 kilogram, I am able to do study on 50 patients for 1 month. In summary, unfortunately, we do not know enough about CBD. We do know that it shows exciting promise and deserves study, but we desperately need objective and unbiased data on the safety and efficacy of this product before we can endorse it or make recommendations about it. Our current existing research setup is not meeting this mandate. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Minahan.
Hi, thank you. May I, before you start, commend your staff. They do a ton of work behind the scenes. I don't think most people have any idea how much goes on behind the scenes, so thank you. I'm Dr. Tom Minahan. I'm an emergency room physician at one of the busiest ERs in California. It's a trauma center. I see drugs every shift, guaranteed. I run a teaching program, and we look at literature a lot. But I'm not here as a doctor. I'm here as a dad. Briefly, my daughter, Mallory. We have 4 kids, my wife and I. Mallory is 12. When she was 14, she had her first seizure. I've learned a lot about epilepsy over the last 10 years. I'm not an expert, but I've learned, sadly, too much. In 10 years, we've tried a dozen medications, and I've researched each of them. Nothing seemed to work. So a year and a half ago, she was having 30 to 40 a month, 12 in a night, and it was routine to put a diaper on her at night. How do you tell your 11-year-old, just put a diaper on? She says, why isn't anybody else wearing a diaper to bed? What do you do? What would you do? It's kind of a tough situation. Our expert, world expert, because I have access to the world docs, said, let's try a medication called Felbitol, FDA approved. This doctor had 2 patients, roughly 2 patients. He said they were doing okay on it. It has a black box for aplastic anemia. If you get this side effect, you have a 1 in 4 chance of dying. It's FDA approved. I wasn't going to go there. I would retry all the dozen drugs we had tried. And someone had said cannabis, but you got to know who I am. I'm a father of 4. I go to church. I give my 10%. I don't smoke. I don't drink. I have never used marijuana in any form whatsoever. Would it really be the right thing to do? It's Schedule I. It's illegal. But we tried it. And within 36 hours, this kid, who was kind of a zombie, gets in the car for church one day, and she looks around. She says, good morning. How is everybody? Who is this kid? This is awesome. Her seizures went down by 90%. And we put her back in school for the first time in 3 years. Hasn't been perfect. I've dealt with some of the meds that show up at our house with labels that supposedly say one thing or another. And I do question the THC. But what did the last 1,000 seizures do to her brain? That's something I don't know. and nor do I have, this was a year and a half when we started. I didn't have time to wait. I didn't have till tomorrow for the research. I realize it's illegal. I have a DEA license. It's kind of risky. And I would have loved to have brought her here today to show you, but dad doesn't want to show off his daughter. But that's illegal. It's like taking heroin on the plane. Research needs to be done, please. I got my education, sadly. I'm a physician. Remember, I tell my docs, look at the research. I got it from social media. That's pathetic. It's really pathetic. But that's the best we had going. And I'm going to continue to keep doing it as long as I don't get in trouble. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Dr. Sabat.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley, Co-Chairman Feinstein, members of the caucus, and guests. I appreciate you and thank you for inviting me to discuss CBD and its potential medical benefits. Let me start by saying that although most major medical associations and I, as co-founder with former Congressman Patrick Kennedy of Smart Approaches to Marijuana, we all vigorously oppose marijuana legalization, and we are extremely concerned with the massive new industry ascendant in states like Colorado, and continue to urge this administration and Congress to enforce the Controlled Substances Act and stop the damage happening in that state. It is important to separate the discussion of the recreational use of marijuana and the potential medical benefits of its components. As we've heard, we have preclinical evidence that CBD can be helpful for seizure control. We have testimonials like the one we just heard that would move everyone. GW Pharmaceuticals, for example, has a highly purified CBD product, as we've heard, and a program covering 400 children. But as Senator Gillibrand rightly asked, what about the kids not in the program? What about the ones, the probably thousands more that we need to, we may want to give access to this drug? The challenge is, how do we know that CBD products work? And how can we ensure that products that we allow to be used prior to FDA approval have some minimum standards that Dr. Minahan or others or any parent would want, some minimum standards? I greatly sympathize with families that deal with things like Dravet syndrome or Lennox-Gastaut. I've met children and sat down with families who are meeting this challenge. It is for that reason and for the compassion we have for people struggling that we should ensure these products are delivered in a timely and safe fashion to families who need it. But safety is not an illusory concern. FDA recently tested 16 CBD products and found that half of them contained no CBD at all. There are hundreds of rogue products on the market with a click of a button that could be bought today by anyone with a smartphone. Yet desperate families are purchasing these because they have nowhere else to go. Right now, frankly, the current situation can be summed up this way. Most CBD manufacturers get away with selling whatever they claim is CBD. Researchers and other groups who want to follow FDA rules are being stifled by bureaucracy. Parents are left confused and frustrated. And if we do have an FDA-approved CBD product soon, it could be held up in a lengthy scheduling process from DEA. However, state elected officials with absolutely no background in this are hastily putting laws together, in my opinion, in the absence of robust federal action. This must change. The good news is that there are some very practical things and relatively straightforward steps that we can do today to make more kids, thousands of children, receive a product with some minimum standards. But let's talk about what would not be helpful, because there are some proposals out there. First of all, rescheduling marijuana. Secondly, removing cannabidiol from the schedule or from Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act would have the opposite intention that we all have. First of all, if marijuana was rescheduled, it would do nothing to increase the access to CBD today. It would do nothing to allow CBD to be in pharmacies. As noted, Senator Booker, cocaine is in Schedule 2. You can't buy it. You cannot access it unless you're one of a dozen doctors who has access to a very specific therapeutic program. Now, I personally think rescheduling marijuana has been a side issue that has been elevated far above its deserved place in this debate, frankly elevated by those in the legalization movement who want the powerful symbolism that would come with a rescheduling. It would not help parents today. And descheduling CBD or removing it from the FDCA would encourage a free-for-all for concoctions. Folks, if we took cannabidiol out of the Controlled Substances Act and removed it from the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, I can claim that this bottle of water is cannabidiol. It is no longer under any kind of regulation. Now, I know that's not what anybody wants. There are some things, though, and there is some good news of things we should do and can do. We're very excited that the federal government has removed the Public Health Service extra layer of research that was really unnecessary. And we think that we could have some compassionate research programs for the seriously ill. We have one with 400. We need more. Absolutely, we need it increased by a factor of 10, by a factor of 100. And frankly, this Congress should fund that because that's not free. That's the barrier. You want to know the barrier, Senator Feinstein? The barrier is money, and we need it to be funded. We can fund the programs that Dr. Ingram is doing. Doesn't have to be Epidiolex, Senator Gillibrand. If we're concerned with one company, let's use the UMIS that taxpayers have been paying for 30 years and produce a cannabidiol purified component. We can have federal and state partnerships. You have the power today in the Controlled Substances Act to get into a partnership with a state and say, we're going to expand a program. You have 10,000 kids in New York? Wonderful. Here's a program, and it's under our authority to do it. And finally, to increase research, we need to increase research by, frankly, I think it's time to allow more than just one place to grow it, but we should have one overarching agency overlooking that. So just in conclusion, CBD does have the potential to help desperately ill individuals. At the same time, some companies and individuals with no medical background are consulting with lawmakers and taking advantage of parents in this desperate situation. Parents do not know where to turn other than social media, and the current expanded access program, I agree, is too small. If we're prepared to remove CBD from the general issue of legalization, why are we rolling it into pieces of legislation that allow banking, which would allow gummy bears to be sold in Colorado, and which would allow marijuana to be used for conditions like PTSD, which the American Psychiatric Association and mental health groups around the country vigorously oppose? Now, there are some practical things we can do to help the federal government to expand the access of this, and we should work that because we have the common objective of having parents today get a safe product even before FDA approval without going through the bureaucratic loopholes. Let's work together to do that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Svet. And you touched on this just a second ago about some of this legislation that the proposals before Congress to change our banking laws to allow marijuana businesses, including those that sell recreational marijuana, to conduct transactions with financial institutions, even though these businesses are violating federal law. If enacted, would these proposals do, what would they do in the size and scope of recreational marijuana enterprises? Would that be a positive development in your view?
Well, I think they would greatly expand this new massive industry. Folks, we are rolling out the red carpet with Big Tobacco 2.0, with a drug that actually reduces IQ, which tobacco does not, with a drug that causes car crashes, which tobacco does not, with a drug that impairs the mind because of intoxication, which tobacco does not. And I greatly worry, and this is why a bipartisan group of folks like Congressman Kennedy and others are extremely concerned when we start giving a green light to these massive enterprises to sell things like gummy bears and to sell things that are clearly high THC, that have nothing to do with CBD. And frankly, I'm very glad Dr. Ingram brought the most profound point of the day, which is that THC causes seizures, has evidence for being a pro-convulsant. There's evidence of that. We don't want that to happen, and we're very worried. And I understand you don't want cash lying around. I get it. But at the same time, we don't want to expand the financial operations of these illegal enterprises, who, which after all are illegal.
Dr. Ingram, in your testimony, you stated, quote, unfortunately, while popular culture, media reporting, and encouraging anecdotal reports suggest that CBD works well to treat epilepsy, we in the medical field are flying blindly, end of quote. Could you explain what you meant by flying blindly and CBD?
Well, it's excellent, sir. It's a big answer.
Turn on your microphone.
It's a big answer. That question comes with a big answer. As NIDA mentioned in their first talk, there have only been 4 studies done, and they were all done between 1978 and 1990. So none of this is new stuff. None of it was on kids. It was all on adults. And their most significant contribution was that CBD could be taken without immediate effect, which is not really like a glowing report on one side or the other. 3 years ago, this was not a topic for discussion. The popular media and really impressive and hopeful stories, anecdotal stories, as he just described, how do you hear that and not want to jump into this with both feet, right? That's what has driven this. We don't have the information to support this. At the American Epilepsy Society meeting last year, we had 2 different sets of data to review. One was 3 studies on Epidiolex, which is proprietary information that belongs technically to the company at this point on those 400 children. And the other was on basically reporting that we get from kids who happen to be on CBD and then come to the doctor for some other reason. So for instance, Colorado had 58 children that they did reviews on that were taking CBD. And it was a well done study. They evaluated, they compared different epilepsy syndromes. They looked to see how different kids fell out based on what they were, what kind of seizures they had. The problem with the study from the very beginning is that Colorado, the physicians, had no idea what I'm taking CBD meant. In fact, they didn't even say that it was a study of children on CBD. They said it was a study on children taking oral cannabis extract. So when I say we're flying blindly, I mean it. We have kids that are taking things that we don't know. They, in many cases, don't know what it is. We don't know what it is. And I want you to appreciate that pediatric epilepsy and epilepsy in general is a lot more like cancer than it is like hypertension. One drug does not fit all. When you look at the Epidiolex studies, they're talking very specifically about studying Lennox-Gastaut and Dravet syndrome and hopefully progressing on to other epilepsy syndromes. But even now, with what I have available, my menu of drugs, if patient A comes in and I give them drug A, their epilepsy will get better. If patient B comes in, I give them drug B, their epilepsy will get better. If I give patient A drug B or patient B drug A, I can make their epilepsy worse. So for us to say CBD works for all kids with seizures, that's not the evidence that would sit in front of us, but we don't have enough medical information to really make any recommendations at this point because we don't have enough of the studies to form our background for that.
My last question will be Dr. Savat. Twice during your testimony you said what we can do in the future, so this is simply giving you a chance to, if there's specific areas where you think there's an opportunity to make changes that would responsibly encourage more CBD research, you have an opportunity to expand on what you've already said.
Well, there are things we can do that are within the Schedule 1 that make it difficult, right? Schedule 1 isn't just difficult because it's called Schedule 1. It's difficult because there are some really minute things. For example, the registration requirements that are there for CBD. Maybe, and this is what Sam recommended, maybe we waive those and allow people and researchers until, to do that, and then the DEA can later review to make sure that it's been proper. Maybe there are things we can do in terms of the handling of the CBD. There are very specific safes and the measurement and the length you can be and how many people can be in a room and these kinds of onerous requirements that we can fix without rescheduling marijuana. And I think that we can do that. Another thing we can do is expand the research sites. Do I think the doors are going to fall down because all the companies are going to want to research into this if we allow more than you miss to study it? No, probably not, but we should allow more avenues for legitimate researchers. And again, as we all want to just do the research, which is in the long term, we want to do compassionate access for today for those who are willing to take the risk. Dr. Ingram is laying out the risks that are inherent. Those are risks some parents are willing to take, and I totally sympathize with them. And if they're willing to take those risks, I think we should allow them to get some CBD products. Not anything that anybody claims is CBD, but something that at least the FDA has said, okay, well, you know what, this is what it claims it is. Doesn't have the mold, doesn't have bacteria, doesn't have THC, which is going to cause seizures. This dose is the same as this dose, and it's the same as the other one. And those are some things that we can do today, and I can't imagine that FDA or others would not be willing to do it. If you want to expand the access programs, I'll repeat that. that's a resource issue. I mean, because that costs money. The costly process of extracting CBD. Folks talk about it like you can grow a weed plant in your backyard and tomorrow squeeze some juice out of it. The reality is the kind of the scientific detail, that the expensive process that goes into extracting that purified CBD and breeding plants in a way that increases that. There are resource issues with that, and so that would be maybe something that this Congress would want to consider.
Okay, thank you all. And now Senator Feinstein.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I think this hearing has been very good, and I want to thank this panel because it brought out a number of questions. My concern always has been between Schedule I and Schedule II is the increase in the THC factor that's been done by calculation by growers of marijuana to produce a more stimulating, I'll use the word hallucinogenic loosely, drug. And there's a lot of it in California. And it concerns me greatly because young people use it. It is also a gateway drug. They go on to other things, and it's problematic. But here we have a situation which really seems eminently solvable. One would be some form of waiver, as you point out, Doctor. Another would be to add to the appropriations, which I am certainly prepared to do as an appropriator, and with the help of the people sitting on this dais, I think we could achieve that to speed the process along. I want to ask Dr. Minahan, if I might, some questions. What do you pay a month for the drug that you buy for your child?
At one point, it was $2,500 a month, and then have it tested at $168 a bottle. On top of that, it's not access for an average American. Not that now.
Yeah.
I have.
How do you know that the dose you're giving her is consistent?
You can have each bottle tested. Outside of that, we got a bottle.
Do you do that? Do you have each bottle?
Not each one, no. Sometimes you roll the dice and you go, well, they've been consistent this long, do you now test it again? I think we kind of believe it kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's a roll the dice thing. But there's been bottles that showed up that said one thing and was completely the opposite, a very low THC, and it was a very high THC. And we got an email from them, hey, sorry. Sorry?
Oh, thanks a lot.
Yeah. In fact, they wanted it back because they're going to give it to cancer
patients. Is that right?
Yeah.
Because they'd resell it?
Yeah.
See, and that's the marketplace. I can speak about California where there's no real regulation. So you don't know what you get.
But if I was in Texas.
So the question comes, there's only one way to get it, and that's to get this process expanded and get it legitimized and get it regulated. And I think those are the things that we have to do and do as quickly as we can. And I hope this doesn't conflate with recreational marijuana because this is totally different. And I think, Dr. Ingram, you pointed out a lot of the very real problems that exist out there on the streets that people may not want to believe, but it's happening in the emergency rooms, all over this country. And so could you comment, Doctor, on what you would do to waive the Schedule I for this drug? What specific would you waive?
Well, I think you would waive the registration requirements, or you can be a little more conservative and say we're going to temporarily waive them. In other words, you're a doctor that wants to handle this. We're not going to make you wait 3 months to decide that, or a month, or whatever the average time was. We're going to automatically grant it to you, and then when DEA gets around to it, we're going to make sure you're handling it in the right way.
As long as you have an MD.
Yeah, I mean, it could be, I would say, you could have board certified for this. You'd maybe want board certified epileptologist, neurologist. I will defer to Dr. Ingram and Dr. Minahan on that. But yeah, I think you would. And then that would be, you could then have somebody who's a doctor-patient relationship, not email relationship with an unknown person from social media. Doctor-patient relationship, and then because remember, a lot of these INDs that GW is doing, there is a limit on the number of patients per doctor. So you could, right, Dr. Ingram? So
yes,
you could expand that. You could, do it with other products, and you really could do this absolutely within Schedule 1.
Can I finish? Could the other doctors comment, please? Dr. Minahan, do you have thoughts on this? No? You don't have to.
No, I'll defer to the epileptologist.
You know, so my own process was with applying for a Schedule 1 license has been a little bit of a stutter stop. I'll get an email saying we've gotten everything, we haven't. The real life process of getting a DEA license is for CBD is just like any other Schedule 1, even though on the application you select what you're applying for a research Schedule 1 license, and you select what product is there. So I would make the case that there would be and I don't know, this may be part of the fast track process that Dr. Throckmorton was discussing. I think that if a person is applying for CBD research in epilepsy, and I don't have a problem with them submitting their research protocol. I think his point of the worst case scenario here is that we make this, we give this the illusion that doctors understand that it's okay. We need more information to be able to say this is okay. We don't even really know what dose to give it. We don't know if you need to give it once a day, twice a day. Everything that we have is given to us by kind of growers, dispensaries, that sort of thing. And it's good data. Some of it's very good data. But I can't go to those growers and say, give me a little bit and let me do some research with it. I have to get mine from the DEA and NIDA. So I think the concept of, one thing that could maybe be removed is you have to add in the extra step of a site visit. And of course you need a site visit if you're doing cocaine research or you're even doing THC research. But getting a regular DEA license, a Schedule 2, you mail it in, you send your money, they send you back your DEA license a couple of weeks later. That process really is not that onerous. This process where you add in all this extra stuff and you need all these site visits and all that sort of thing, it's a little bit more difficult.
And you can do those site visits later. I mean, even if people push back.
My time is up, but what I'd like to request is that you, the three of you, put in writing your thoughts on this specific question and send it to our committee, because I think both the chairman and I would like to take some action, and the question is how refined we make that action and that we know what we're doing when we're doing it. So your help would be, and anybody else out there, and I think we'll talk to Dr. Throckmorton more about this as well. So thank you very much, and best of good fortune to you, Dr. Minahan, and your little girl.
Thank you for having me.
Senator Gillibrand.
So I want to continue to probe on this issue that Senator Feinstein started, the difference between Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. Do you have a license to do any research for Schedule 2?
So Schedule 2 license, any neurologist in America is going to have to practice. We have to have it for stimulants. We have to have it for antipsychotics. So right now I have a Schedule 2 license. The Schedule 1 is not something that most of us have just offhand. And so that has to be applied for before we can do any research in this.
So do you believe if we changed it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2, the result would be more people would do research?
I think it would. There's a big difference between product development and entry-level research. And I think that a lot of physicians hit this on first blush and go, ugh, or they try that first step and it doesn't go right, and so they just walk away from it. And that's why I say I think from a us standpoint, on our side of the street, I think a Schedule 2, and that's been one of the calls of the American Epilepsy, all these societies, is that we degrade that, or at least analyze it as a barrier to research. It's a little bit of a decision I'm glad I don't have to be the one to make about where it fits, because I don't want it to become Schedule 2 in the product development side of things until we know for sure what we're dealing with. So I think that there's a mixed message there. I think leaving it Schedule 1 but making it a much more expedited process, removing the site visit, preferentially moving those studies to the top of a pile, understanding that CBD and THC research are two separate things. And the other thing that I didn't mention before that is of supernatural importance here is that if I get my DEA license tomorrow and I live in Iowa, or I live in California, or I live in New York or New Jersey, I get my DEA license tomorrow, but I don't have access to CBD, it doesn't work.
Right.
It doesn't work.
So what the other thing we're trying to do is to change the number of places that can grow marijuana so that we have more access. Because having just one source of the medicine to research or the plant to research isn't enough.
Yes, ma'am.
And even as described earlier by our FDA witness, to have or by you specifically, that you're limited in how much you can get seems crazy.
Yeah.
Since there are so few physicians who are willing to do this research. Again, it sounds like these are barriers to research.
You know, the funny thing about that, Mississippi has a lot of farmland. We can grow as much weed as you need, Dr. Gillibrand. The funny thing about that is that restriction is not a geography thing. It's not a physical plant problem, referring to the farm, not the actual physical plant. It's a problem with, right now Oxford has enough product to make 30 kilograms of product, 30 times what they have been allowed to grow through NIDA. And so everything that they grow is, and of course it all has to be secured funding up front. He's absolutely right. The money is where this ultimately leads. But all of that funding through NIH and then through NIDA is what limits us. It's not our physical plant per se. Now, we can get discussions of distribution and that sort of thing and how do we get it to and fro. Very little of the already commercially grade marijuana that's grown in Oxford is actually used in Mississippi. It's farmed out and sent to other places around the country, and in fact is sold in states like California and Colorado. But what we need, it's not an issue with how fast can we grow it.
Schedule 2, would you have been given the amount that you asked for? Like, I'm concerned that
I don't know.
That the researchers who are willing to do this research aren't getting timely access and aren't getting the amount they need quickly enough, because
I don't know, but I can say that we all agree that 1 month of study on 50 patients is not enough.
It's not enough. It seems
enough.
absurd. So I want to have clarification, and I would like you to add this to your letter to Senator Feinstein. What are these barriers specifically? Because we don't know enough to figure out how do we reduce the barriers. And the reason why many of us believe moving into Schedule 2 will reduce the barriers, because other serious drugs are within Schedule 2 and have very good ability to restrict, but it does open up access to research. Because the other thing is if we just waive for one strain, the last testimony you said that there was many strains. There was like, I don't know, how many did you say? There was
so there are 80 plus cannabinoids plus 300 other compounds in marijuana.
Right, so if we're only going to waive it for one, to do the research on one, that seems absurd. Why aren't we doing the research on all of it? Why aren't we incentivizing scientists and doctors to do the research on all of it? Because I hear from patients not just who have seizures. I hear from patients who have PTSD. Our veterans are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and they have seen very positive results with various use. We've seen people with MS. We have patients with glaucoma. We have patients with cancer. And so my question is, why are we not allowing research on every aspect of this plant so we can cure diseases, solve problems, just as we did with very, very harsh chemicals and products like heroin? We've done research. We've made cocaine Schedule 2 so more research can be done. We have many opioid derivatives now that are very good pain relief. I don't know why we don't treat it like opiates and do the proper research. I'm also concerned that we have only one drug company who wants to do this right now because it doesn't make money. If it's a Schedule 1 drug and it's illegal and dads are worried, I don't want to break the law, but I want to save my child, it's absurd that we are creating impediments to basic research. We do this with other serious drugs. I don't know why we're not doing it with this one.
Well, and if I can make a little side comment about the, we've heard over and over and over again about these 400 patients that are on Epidiolex. When you get a DA license and get involved in that GW Pharma study, you're given a limit of patients that you're on. I know my sister state of Alabama had 100 patients approved, 50 kids, 50 adults, and that's their limit. The problem with Epidiolex, as I see it, is that we have two separate patient populations in America right now. We have the Epidiolex gang that is getting 98% CBD. So Epidiolex is very refined, it's very secure, it's very quality controlled, it's the same thing every time, the dosing is standard, and they're doing it the right way. Small numbers, but the right way, and in fairness, they are a drug company. They get to set how much product they're basically giving away at this point. The second population is the average American that doesn't live near an Epidiolex site. So those are families who are getting their CBD in the market, we'll say. And one of the things that we're learning from those families who deserve so much praise and are so intrepid in doing this is that isolated CBD may not be the gold standard. We may need a little bit of THC in there to make those receptors fire away. And so some families say, you know, when we go pure CBD, when we go into the 90, 95, 98% CBD, it doesn't work as well as if we've got just a little touch of CBD because they interact with the receptors differently. So let's say Epidiolex comes out a year from now and says, this is a new FDA-approved marketed drug with standard doses that is pure CBD. We may have missed an opportunity to develop something better that works on that receptor a little differently because we didn't research it.
More research, more drug companies interested, and we have to remove those barriers to that very important research because I don't want to be a parent who doesn't know what I'm getting in the mail. I don't want to be a parent who doesn't know what the right dose is. But these barriers are ones that are created by the federal government, and we are standing in the way of children and patients getting medicine across this country, and we have to fix it. And small measures is not going to do it. We have to do it properly, accurately, and effectively so it's efficient. And I look forward to your letter to Senator Feinstein.
If I can just say...
That's my time.
Booker.
Sorry.
Senator Booker.
You talk about how fortunate patients that might live around such a dispensary. And I really, your Dr. Minham, your testimony really touched me. But I really appreciated the fact that you said that you could afford it. And there's incredible amounts of family that aren't lucky, aren't right around those folks. Folks making $20,000 a year, $30,000 a year, who have suffering children. And so I'm happy that the first panel, we established the fact that that there is a chokehold, years waiting, reputable researchers can't get what they need. You're an example of that. The small paucity of the amount that you're given to research, that we have a serious rehab that we need to do in that system. But I'm still tripping, and I know that, that Senator Feinstein rightfully asked to put this in writing, and I see Dr. Sevat, you can barely contain yourself with your finger on the microphone. What is the difference between Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 in your mind?
Well, it's actually a very technical difference and a very minor difference, and it's not going to make the difference for research. I'll tell you why. Because, first of all, Schedule 2...
Hold on, stop. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm going to interrupt you a lot because I have a little time.
All right.
Dr. Ingram just said it makes a big difference. His ability to access Schedule 2 drugs. Dr. Ingram, is that true? Difference in being able to access Schedule 2 drugs for research versus Schedule 1?
Well, we already have Schedule 2.
Right.
You know, we're already
easier to get, easier to access.
We have it as part of our practice.
Right. So with that, I've heard testimony from a doctor, a researcher, that says Schedule 2 is easier to access.
Here's the thing. Schedule 2 is absolutely easier to research, but the issue is it doesn't solve the problem that you want of getting the drugs to folks now.
Already concentrated on that.
And it does not allow you to prescribe it. Right now, we have a Schedule 1 drug that is the date rape drug, Rohypnol, GHB. We have a Schedule 4 that is exactly that Schedule 1 called Xyrem that's used for narcolepsy. There are ways where marijuana does not meet the definition of Schedule 2, and you can create those products, and we should do that.
Clearly, Schedule 2 is easier to access. Clearly, you can do research on it. Clearly, you have drug companies, as Senator Gillibrand just said.
It's a small difference.
Well, then why are you resisting that difference then?
Because we should spend our time doing things that are going to help families now and help researchers now, which are the things that I mentioned about multiple sites.
You're saying to me, sir, stop.
And it's a red herring by the legalization movement. Who wrote the CARES Act?
Excuse me. Clearly, it's optics that you're concerned with. Clearly, this makes a difference, and you're saying this, and you could put your rest of your answers in writing, But clearly, the downside of this, the danger of this, is not that families will be hurt. You're just saying that they will not be helped enough. And so we have not just CBD, as you just admitted, it's an entire marijuana plant that has a lot of other aspects that could potentially be helpful. That right now we have a choke point on the source, and the researchers unable to get it. And a schedule change may not have the grand difference that people want, but it has a difference in the ability for research to being done. Now, the Senator Gillibrand went through the different diseases and the different challenges we have from our military veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress, from people with cancers and glaucomas and other challenges who can't even get to the point of being in trials, not just for CBD, but for other elements as well. And so, just one more time, Dr. Ingham, you're telling me that you agree that their medical value does exist in the overall study of this plant and its ability to help sick Americans.
Of course. We already use Marinol in our cancer patients every day. I mean, and if we removed plant-based abusive potentials from the market, then you're talking about removing a lot of our current prescription medications. The key for us is we have Americans who are using this already every day in a geographically segregated way, some with tremendous success, and we want to understand that because we want to make that widespread. We want to make it safe, and we want to make it widespread.
And you're a researcher who is doing research right now on Schedule II drugs.
I prescribe Schedule II drugs every day.
Right, and so the idea that a Schedule I drug has no medical application whatsoever, while you're telling me in your testimony that there are potential medical applications, clearly shows that this does not qualify for what a Schedule I drug says it is.
I think marijuana needs significantly more research, and CBD in particular needs significantly more research for us to be able to use it in a novel and safe way.
Dr. Sabet, if you felt like you didn't get heard, I'll give you a little bit of time, and then we're going to adjourn.
I appreciate it. I agree with everything that Dr. Ingram said. We absolutely need to expand the sites and not have it be where you happen to live. And so we should do that. I don't think we should conflate issues of banking and even issues of PTSD in veterans when every major mental health organization and the American Psychiatric Association opposes the use of THC, high THC marijuana, let alone smoked marijuana, which we don't smoke any medicine, because of the mental long-term psychiatric illness that could happen, even if in the short term there's some self-medication going on. Absolutely, there are people in desperately ill situations that should be enrolled in trials, so we can say definitively, and right now there are studies going on that I support, looking into some of these conditions. So I think we're all on the same page that we want to, and I also think we're on the same page on the other components of marijuana. Senator Booker, you are right. There are other components in the marijuana plant that can be useful. We all should study them, and we shouldn't be afraid of THC. I mean, just because it gets you high, well, absolutely, so does OxyContin and other things. That doesn't, just because something gets you high doesn't mean it's not a good medication. A lot of pain analgesics, that's what they do. So we all are on the same page of doing the research responsibly. What we don't like, and the reason why, and I'll just finish with this, the reason why I am joined by 4 major medical associations with expressing major concerns over the CARES Act, mainly because of the PTSD, mainly because of the what it would do to CBD. In other words, it would allow me to claim that this is CBD. We are concerned about that, and we think we all want the same end goal. Absolutely. We want parents to get a standardized medication, and we want to be able to work together, and we want to work with you to make it better for parents and researchers to be able to access this for the potential medical application.
I've got some articles I'm going to put in the record here at this point. And I thank all of you for your testimony, and I thank all my colleagues for cooperating. Meeting adjourned.
I'd like to put one in this one is this.